Welcome back in, everybody, to Bird 365, a Tuesday edition following the NFL Draft. We are joined now by Ian Cummings from Pro Football Network. Ian, thanks for joining the show, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We finally have a full draft to review, so happy about that. I know for the months leading up to it, it's like, let's get this over with. Let's get it going.
Yeah.
So we finally
let's start next year. Who's the top of your big board next year, Ian?
Ooh, Luther Burden from Missouri. That wide receiver, man, he's good. We got a good wide receiver class on tap.
We always have a good wide receiver class.
I know, man. We're in a golden age. It's just how it is. But I won't get too far into 2025 because I'm already digging into that. We've got 2024 to review first.
Yeah. Who do you like best? We'll start there. Obviously, we're going to talk Eagles draft, but who was your favorite draft?
Yeah, there were a few that stood out to me. The Bears, obviously, with the capital they got, I thought they did a very good job. I thought the Chiefs, again, did a very nice job getting value. You know, tried again. The Steelers really improved that offensive line. We got some talent at wide receiver, too. So those are a few that stand out to me. I didn't really see too many drafts that I didn't like this year. You know, there were a few that I was like, could have gotten a little bit better value. You know, the Falcons had some iffy decisions, particularly in round one. I wasn't a big fan of the QB pick that they did, but overall, I thought it was a pretty strong class. The 49ers were another one. I thought they got great value. Pearsall was a little rich for me, but I think in that scheme, he can be productive. So overall, a good year, but the Steelers, the Chiefs, the Bears, a few other teams as well. At the top of my head, but it was a good.
Yeah, I love the Steelers draft. Well, I know Andy Weidel well, and that looked like an Eagles draft. If you woke up and looked at it, you didn't know who drafted it. It looked like an Eagles draft. But to your point about the 6 quarterbacks in the first 12, 14 offensive players before a defensive player. How much did that surprise you?
That surprised me a little bit for sure. And, you know, on one hand, like I would have expected it. If you told me that there was a class that this would happen, I would have expected this one because I thought this class was disproportionately stocked on the offensive side of the ball, right? You had that big 3 at wide receiver. You had the top offensive lineman. We were hearing that maybe 8 or 10 offensive linemen would go in round 1, right? So a lot of talent there. Brock Bowers as well, and then the QBs. So I knew defensive talent was going to get pushed down the board. I didn't think we'd have to wait until 15 to see the first guy go.
Ian, what did you make of the overall, before we get into some of the players, the Eagles draft? You just mentioned the Bears, the Steelers as some teams that got great value out of the NFL draft. Where do the Eagles rank on your big board of teams that you know did well during the draft? I know you said you liked what most teams did, but where do the Eagles fall for you?
Yeah, I'd say they were in the top half for sure. You know, I think getting Quinyon Mitchell when they did was really impressive. And then Cooper DeJean in round 2 was a phenomenal. That was one of my favorite scheme fits for him. You know, it was the Eagles or maybe the Seahawks would be a potential good scheme fit that I had in my mind. But the Eagles, you know, with Vic Fangio, I think he can fit very well in that system, either as a star defender. They can play him at safety. They can play him at cover 3 zone corner if they want to. So a lot of flexibility that you get with him. And then Jalix Hunt in round 3 was one of my favorite developmental edges at that point. And then on day 3 as well, I thought they got a lot of great value with Schroeder, with Johnny Wilson, and I. Smith was solid. The offensive lineman they got as well. So overall, it was a very strong class for them, I think. You know, I want to see how some of those day 3 picks pan out and how they fit. But overall, I was pretty impressed.
When it comes to some of the tweeners that we kind of talk about with the versatility, sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a bad thing. So I look at 2 particular players that you just mentioned in the Eagles draft, Cooper DeJean. Where are they going to start him? Where do you think ultimately his best spot will be in the NFL? And Johnny Wilson, who a lot of teams, at least some teams were thinking about moving him to tight end. The Eagles have already said, no, he's a wide receiver. Those 2 particular guys, when it comes to future positions and taking advantage of their versatility.
Yeah, for sure. I think for DeJean, the moniker of a tweener is a little bit more of a strength for him. Like he can play a lot of different spots. I think with his projection, obviously he played mainly corner at Iowa, but I think a lot of his best traits, you know, the route recognition, the eye discipline, the range, the explosion and support, and when clicking and closing, the ball skills, the catch point as well, the overall playmaking instinct that he provides. I think all of those things translate really well at safety, and he's got really good pedal technique as well, very good efficient footwork on his click and close, plant and drive. So, you know, I think safety can be a place where he makes a home pretty early on, but at the same time too, like I said, in cover 3 looks, like if you're playing zone where you play side saddle off the wide receiver a little bit, right, and just use his eyes to watch the quarterback and key in on intent, I think he can play very well there. So I could see a scenario where, you know, Darius Slay, you let him play out this year, right? You got Quinyon Mitchell on the other side, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson as a nickel potentially, right? And DeJean can play nickel in certain looks, maybe if you have a bigger receiver as well, but I think he can play safety as well. So I could see a situation where DeJean switches between nickel and safety early on, and then can play some corner looks and zone schemes as well. But for Johnny Wilson, the tweener label is a little bit more precarious, right? Because he's a little too big. And, you know, for his size, I think he does have good separation ability. I think you see some of the ways that he can chop his feet on stems, it curls and hitches, right? You know, he's got some good stopping ability, good decelerative capacity as well. He's explosive. He's got vertical speed, right? The frame is dominating for sure. But there are times when, you know, naturally at 6'7", you are going to play a little bit too tall a lot of the time, right? And especially when you need to sink your hips and redirect on in breakers, right? Like not always the smoothest on those. So there are a few concerns I have with his overall translatability if you want to run a full receiver route tree, right? I could see him being a move tight end potentially, you know, kind of switch between receiver on the boundary and certain looks and then playing with move tight end a little bit as well. I think you want to indulge that versatility because he's a very good blocker in the slot as well. You know, kind of that front line blocker role would be very good for him, but at the same time too, he's got some rack ability. So his is a little more interesting, his projection, but I think there is enough talent where you can indulge that and make the best of it.
Ian, the controversial pick in Philadelphia has been the round 3 pick. You mentioned that you liked him as a developmental player. I think a lot of people had a problem with taking a developmental player with that premium pick at the end of the 3rd round. What do you think of the pick there at that position, value-wise, and then what do you think of the player as a whole?
Yeah, so he was my 87th overall player, actually, prospect in the class. So that was good value for him. That was a round where I would have taken him. And I think for the Eagles, too, because you still have some contracts that are due to be up in 2025 at the edge spot, right? You got Bryce Huff, you got Nolan Smith in round 1, but, you know, the book's still out on that one. So, you know, there's still a little bit of long-term uncertainty there. So I think round 3, getting a guy with the traits that Jalix Hunt has was very appealing to me. So that was actually a good pick. I liked that pick a lot. There is going to be a learning curve for him. I think, you know, he played safety to start his football career, and he only transitioned to full-time edge like 2 or 3 years ago, right? So, you know, it's been a pretty, you know, not a big runway for him to the NFL, and he was already productive at Houston Christian, right? But the physical palette of tools is what really intrigues me, right? Because 6'4", over 250 pounds, 34.5-inch arms, and then he tested as an elite athlete. We're talking elite explosion numbers. He ran in the 4.6s with a 40-yard dash. So you can see that speed and bend, you know, working up the apex, right? Stressing angles right off the snap. He's got that burst. He's got that pursuit speed. And then their reps as well. You know, the modern NFL is all about disguise and coverage looks. He can actually, you know, patrol the flats in coverage. He can hinge around. He's got very good.
Yeah, he was a safety.
Technique.
I mean,
and you can see that background and how he plays. They dropped him into coverage a lot, and he's actually very good at managing hip leverage and flipping his hips and making sure that he stays aligned with receivers. So I think the versatility that Hunt provides right away is appealing. But, you know, if he can continue to work on his hand usage and his power channeling, he has all the tools to be a good edge rusher in the NFL. So I'm very bullish on the projection. I think he landed in a good spot where he won't be pressured to be the guy right away.
I want to talk about the 5th round in Philadelphia. They got 3 picks, the Eagles, but 2 particularly come into a situation where the Eagles need some help in that slot receiver position. Anaya Smith from Texas A&M, not the fastest guy in the world, stopwatch-wise, but more quick than fast, manufactured touch player, maybe. I want to hear your thoughts on that. Certainly the Eagles have not shown an ability to take advantage of those types of players. Maybe Kellen Moore changes that. And then Jeremiah Trotter Jr., obviously a big deal here in Philadelphia and for his dad. He's not like his dad. He's not 260 pounds, but those players don't exist anymore. So in a lot of ways, he had to evolve. Your thoughts on him as a potential prospect as well?
Yeah, so I'll start with Anaya Smith. I was thinking he would go in the day 3 range, somewhere around there. I thought there were a few, if you were looking for a wide receiver 3, I thought there were some better options out there. But I do think Anaya Smith does provide a unique element with, like you said, the ability to be schemed touches, right? You know, he started his career as a running back and then switched to wide receiver. And that gadget element is kind of there with this play where you can scheme him touches for sure. And he's dense, he's compact, he's around 5'9", but close to 200 pounds. So, you know, he's pretty rocked up. He's got good mass for his size. He can break tackles. He's got good vision as a ball carrier when you scheme him touches, right? You know, in between the tackles or on sweep motions, right? Get him out into space. And he's got the explosion, the agility, the contact balance to really make the most of those reps. For me, the questions derive from the route tree is still expanding even at this point. And then at the catch point, he's just not going to be a force at the catch point. You know, he doesn't have the largest wingspan. He doesn't have great instincts and body control, right? So in the hands as well can be a little inconsistent. So for me right now, I think his primary function would be as that scheme touch guy. You know, you want to make sure you're going to have to make a more concerted effort to get him the ball. Once you do get him the ball, he can do something with it. You know, he's got all of the rack elements that you want, but he might be a little more confined to that early on. So that's a tricky pick, but I like the projection if you're willing to be creative with the usage there. With Jeremiah Trotter Jr., that was an interesting pick for me because I did really like the 2022 film. The 2023 film regressed a little bit. I know he was dealing with a hamstring injury at times throughout the year, so I'm wondering if he can get back to full strength and full health, might we see a little more of that mobility gleaned out from his style, right? He's one of those, because it's interesting. He's only like around 230, but he is pretty dense and squatty, right? Like he packs a punch at contact. You don't really expect it. So, you know, for me, I'm just at that size at 230, you don't just want to be a Sam linebacker at the NFL level because that's not big enough to be that full-time role. So I'm just curious how much of a multifaceted profile he'll have once he is healthy. And I'm hoping that we can see more of that because in 2022, I really liked his ability to take on blocks at the second level within the tackles, right? You know, in the box, really good with his spatial awareness, you know, knowing how to sidestep and how to flex his body to kind of squirm through and get to the ball carrier. I thought he was very instinctive in that light, using targeted physicality and micro movements to evade blocks and get in the backfield. So I liked that part of his game. I liked the physicality. And there are times where, you know, he can patrol those short hook zones in the second level and click and close on routes and recognize intent from the quarterback, right? So I think there's a decent coverage framework to work with. There's a decent run defense framework to work with. And he's a willing blitzer who's got some burst and bend as well. It's just a matter of how high is the ceiling with this pick, right? So I think if he can stay healthy, get healthy, we'll be able to see that. But there is some uncertainty there.
Ian, I want to ask you about the first-round pick, widely regarded as cornerback one of the draft, Quinyon Mitchell. Now he is confirmed to be cornerback one after he went first overall for corners. What do you think his fit is in Philadelphia? Do you like the role? Do you like the fit in Philadelphia? And can he be a day one starter coming into the 2024 season?
Oh, yeah, for sure. I love the fit, and I do think he could be a day one starter. I think, you know, with Vic Fangio, you see a lot of overlapping exotic blitz and rush looks and then overlapped with zone coverage, right? You know, let those guys play off a little bit and react to the QB, right? And play off of mistakes that the QB makes because of the pressure looks. So I think it's a really fun fit for him because a lot of his bread and butter at Toledo was off man and zone, where he could play a little bit more with space, play reactive instead of trying to be proactive and kind of authoritative at the line and press man. And he can do that. He showed that he can play press if needed at the Senior Bowl, but there is a little less certainty there as opposed to off man and zone, which is kind of where he really perfected his craft in college. He's so good at pedaling, playing off receivers, and then recognizing breaks, keying in on the hips when they break in, and then diverting downfield, getting in front of the pass with that closing speed. And, you know, his range as a playmaker is incredible. And then the ball skills to always disrupt the pass and either generate turnovers or generate incompletions. He's one of the best in the class at doing that. So I love the fit. I think it's great because he's a great schematic fit from a coverage perspective, but he can also play off of those rush looks very well, and he can make the QB even more uncomfortable in that light. So love the fit, and I do think he has the processing ability, the technical prowess, and the overall athleticism to be a starter early on.
John, just to follow up if I can. Ian, how much stock, and this is particularly about Quinyon, but more so as a whole when you're analyzing players in the draft and when they go into the NFL, how much stock do you put into the talent that they play against at the collegiate level? We're even seeing it with the Jalix Hunt pick, right? He went to Houston Christian. You know, who's he playing against? Quinyon Mitchell, Toledo. Who's he playing against? How much stock do you put into that when you're evaluating a player and how they might pan out in the NFL?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's one of those things you definitely take notice of it for sure. Like if they play at a certain level, but I think a lot of those top talents, they'll go to an all-star circuit, right? Like Jalix Hunt and Quinyon Mitchell were both at the Senior Bowl. So I think that's a good opportunity. Like, hey, we know they have the talent. Looking at the film, we know they have the talent. We know they were productive. Now the next step is seeing how they perform against comparable competition at an all-star event like the Senior Bowl. And at the Senior Bowl, Quinyon Mitchell was the best corner there, right? At the Senior Bowl, Jalix Hunt actually made an impression with his power against tackles one-on-one and actually proved that he belonged there, right? And then on the flip side, a guy like Willie Drew from Virginia State, who was very productive at Virginia State. He tested very well, but at the Senior Bowl, you could see some technical improvements that he still needed to make, both tracking the football and matching guys, that kind of showed, all right, he was basically running off the talent at the FCS level. So there's more refinement needed, right? And that was reflected in his draft capital. I think he might have gone undrafted. So, you know, it's one of those things you take into account for sure when a guy plays at a lower level. But if they're productive, if they're talented, the next step is seeing them in that all-star circuit. And a lot of times they'll confirm it. They belong, right? And I think Quinyon did that. I think Jalix did that. It's not the same for every guy, but that's how you kind of contextualize it in the analysis.
Right. Makes sense.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, Ian, back to the weeds. I want to talk developmental offensive line prospects. The Eagles got 2 of them. They thought Howie Roseman admitted in maybe the deepest offensive line draft at the top in a very long time. He would have been shocked if he didn't come out with one of them, and he didn't. But they did dip into the pool on day 3. A couple interior prospects: Trevor Keegan from Michigan, Dylan McMahon from NC State. 6-round centers are pretty good here in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. I don't expect that out of Dylan McMahon. But your thoughts on Keegan and McMahon?
Yeah, for sure. And I didn't get to watch as much of them as I did other guys, but I was able to see a little bit for sure. Keegan is experienced playing on that Michigan offensive line that won the Joe Moore Award, and he's definitely got experience at the guard spot for sure. With him, athletic enough, very athletic, and I think there's a good functional floor with his knee bend and his ability to cover gaps with that, right? But at the same time, too, a little short-armed as well, and that can contribute to not the best power output at contact, but also he'll lurch a little bit past the center of gravity. It has trouble sustaining blocks at times without that arm length, right? So you see the limitations that come with the physical profile as well as the strengths. But I do think he's got great temperament as a blocker, very physical. He's a finisher. And that whole Michigan offensive line it was kind of a mentality that permeated throughout that unit. So Trevor Keegan was not immune to that. He's very physical. He's a finisher for sure. And you love to see that because it kind of percolates to everyone else. He's athletic enough. He's experienced. I just, some of the technical deficiencies that come with the lacking arm length, like lurching past your center of gravity, bending at the waist, and kind of dipping your head, can still improve with those things. So I think there's still work to do, but you have an experienced guy who's athletic enough, who's physical. I looked at him as a really good depth pick. I don't know if he's going to be a starter. I don't know if he'll ever be a long-term starter for them. Maybe if he can keep honing in on that technical side and stop lurching, he can become that. But I think right away he does give you security at the guard spot. And I think that's ultimately what, if you can get security, depth for a long time, that's a win. So I liked that pick. And then Dylan McMahon, kind of a similar profile at center, right, where he's a little smaller, definitely shorter arms, and again that translates to, for him, he's squatty, he's low to the ground, so he has that natural leverage where lurching isn't always as big of an issue. But there are times where without that elite reach, some guys can pry past him a little bit. So with McMahon, very good tester, very rangy, very athletic off the snap. He can traverse gaps, he can explode past the 3-tech and seal out, right? But you're still working with a guy who's just generally undersized, and there are things that come with that too. So I think with McMahon, he was honestly a very good value for them. The ideal outcome is that Cam Jurgens switches back to center and becomes a high-level starter, so you can forget about it and just have McMahon as that backup. But overall, I think in round 5 and round 6, you're looking for experience and you're looking for athleticism as well. And at the very least, I think those guys fit those 2 bills.
Ian, I want to ask you about the NFL. It was a great breakdown there of the Eagles draft class. 6 quarterbacks in the top 12. I mean, look, I know everybody wants the next quarterback, but which picks did you like there, and which were you like, look, that's just a severe overreach? I mean, 6 and 12 is just crazy, as a crazy number, and I really wasn't all that high on the class as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. Those top 3 picks, I could see it for all of them. Caleb Williams, obviously, right? No analysis needed there. Jaden Daniels, I think the talent is through the roof with him, and then I think he fits the scheme for Washington as well. So I could see that too. He was my QB3, but I could see it. Drake May, big fan of the value there at number 3. He was one of my top guys, and I think the talent his ceiling is the highest in the class if you can put it all together. So I think all of those 3, I could see it. I wasn't too averse to that. Number 8. Penix going to the Falcons, that was the big one for me. That was the one where I was like, I'm not sure if I see this, right? And, you know, it was a reach on my board, but it wasn't as big of a reach as, say, you know, Kenny Pickett back in 2022, where he went round 1 and he was a mid to late day 2 guy for me. So that was a big reach. Penix was my 33rd overall player. So it wasn't quite as big. You know, it's something that you can rationalize a little more. But at the same time, I don't think he fits the Falcons timeline at all. You just signed Kirk Cousins to a massive
that's the
deal.
thing. You're doing it more from a scouting perspective, Ian, so I get it. But when you pay the other quarterback over $100 million, I mean, what are we doing here if you're the Atlanta Falcons?
And then it does loop back over to the scouting side. Like with that 8th pick, you could have picked Rome Odunze or Dallas Turner, someone who can help you win right now with Kirk Cousins. Instead, you passed up that opportunity and got a 24-year-old quarterback who probably won't even play until his 3rd or 4th year if things go according to plan with Cousins. So it really didn't make sense to me. I understand if you love the player, take the player, because you don't know if a guy like that is going to come around. But I don't think Penix was that level of prospect. So that one confused me. I think that really set the Falcons back for the rest of the class because they were playing catch up on the talent side, and they didn't add a wide receiver, which I wanted them to add. So that pick was not, I wouldn't have done that. But Bo Nix at 12 was another one that was a slight reach. But again, I could see the rationale with that a little bit more because I think he's a very good scheme fit for the Broncos, and you needed a quarterback. They had Jarrett Stidham and Zach Wilson in that QB room, right? So if you like Bo Nix enough, yes, invest in that. I think he's a good scheme fit for Sean Payton. I think a lot of the things that Russell Wilson didn't do well, playing, throwing over the middle, playing within the offense, the confines of the offense on rhythm, Bo Nix is good at those things. And he's accurate as well. He's a good athlete, good arm elasticity off platform. So I liked it enough to see it through. Penix, a little more uncertain. And then JJ at number 10, I liked that one too. I think if there's any situation where he can succeed and reach his ceiling, it's Minnesota.
And that's where I was talking to a GM before the draft, Ian, and I said, we all knew Caleb was the top quarterback, and I asked him who was number 2 on his board, and he told me who's going to be in Minnesota because of the fit, the situation. Kevin O'Connell, Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, T.J. Hawkinson. You got offensive tackles with Darrisaw and O'Neal. When you look at it post-draft from a scouting perspective, does that fit, or do you look at it a little bit differently, the situation? No,
it absolutely fits. You know, I was looking at the situations, and I would rank Minnesota number 1 for the ideal, you know, the QB friendly outcome, right? Like they had, like you said, they have the offensive line, they have the weapons in place. They could add a slot receiver, I think, but you know, generally they have enough there. And then they got Kevin O'Connell, who's a great offensive mind, who's shown that he can scheme to QBs. And I think it plays to JJ's strength as well. You know, JJ definitely needs to prove a little more, right? You know, coming out of college, the question with him was, we know he's talented. We know he's young, right? He's a good leader, but can he elevate the offense when he needs to, right? That was the biggest question that we never really got to see, even when he won the national championship. That said, you know, diagnostic things that you can point to that kind of bode well for his friendliness as an offensive, you know, game manager, field general, right? The efficient mechanics, right? Very good at channeling his energy from his base to his release. Very smooth in that aspect. Very smooth release, very crisp. And then he can work the pocket. He can navigate through creases. He can work off platform on boot action rollouts and play action fakes, right? So all of those things, I think, play into the strengths of the O'Connell system, right? I think you want to keep improving some of the processing field vision aspects. But if you're Kevin O'Connell, you have the supporting structure and the offensive scheme to take a little bit of pressure off McCarthy early on. And you got Sam Darnold as well. So you don't have to start him right away. You can maybe wait a few games and then insert McCarthy. So I think all of the elements, time, support, coaching, they bode very much in favor of McCarthy. And then, you know, you turn back to other guys, right? Like Bo Nix going in Denver. That offensive line is still kind of shaky, right? The wide receiver core, you know, it's not bad, but, you know, there's room to improve it, right? Drake May going to New England. I loved May as a prospect, and I do think they improved a little bit in the draft, but there is still a sense of uncertainty. You don't have the sheer elite talent to support that Minnesota does. And I think that's what puts them ahead.
Wow. What other thing in the first round, Ian, stuck out to you the most? We've talked about the 6 quarterbacks in the top 12. We've talked about the 14 offensive players to start the draft. I don't know what the stat was. That's the first time that's happened. I don't know, maybe ever, John. I'm not sure what the.
Yeah, that was a record, and the previous record was 7. So they shattered it.
They shattered it. They doubled it. So what? Just anything else that really stood out to you in the first round as either, hey, that's great, or the opposite end of the spectrum, hey, that was a terrible move there.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm an easy grader, so there aren't too many things that I'll come out and say, "Oh, that was terrible. I wouldn't have done that." Right? There were a few that surprised me. I think the 49ers going with Ricky Pearsall at 31 was a slight reach on my board again, but I think in that scheme he can be very productive. So it wasn't something that I knocked. I think the Alabama defenders, Terry Arnold going to the Lions at 24, Dallas Turner going to the Vikings at 17. I thought those were two phenomenal value adds because they were both top 10 talents on my board. So I was over the moon for those two teams getting the talents that they did. I think the offensive tackle class and how that fell out was kind of interesting because Joe Alt went to the Chargers early on. There was speculation that, maybe they would try and trade down to get more capital. They didn't. They chose Joe Alt right there. And a lot of mock drafts, pretty much every other mock draft I did had the Titans taking Alt. So I wonder if that changed their plans because
the
they got
JC Latham stuff.
Yeah.
That late the Eagles, because the Eagles like JC Latham. And somebody down there told me he ain't gonna be there.
Yeah.
So they had a good hint that he was going to go top 10. Boy, that surprised me a little bit.
There was a real run on offensive linemen in that round. I think it was 9 offensive linemen, and then they were all tackles, I think, in the first round.
Yep. And there were a few guys like Jordan Morgan and Graham Barton. They're probably going to play inside at the next level, but they played tackle in college. So, it was kind of the inklings that we got leading into the draft that there might be not 8 or 9 or 10 guys going round 1. And that's exactly what happened. So, sometimes it does play out as intended, as planned. So that's the fun part. But Brock Bowers to the Raiders was another kind of surprising fit. I don't think anyone had them picking him. I like it. I don't think he's redundant with Michael Mayer. He's kind of a weapon more so than just a pure tight end. So I liked that one a lot. And then, looking at the board here, there weren't too many big surprises aside from that. I think some of the wide receiver landing spots, I'm intrigued to see what happens. But overall, a pretty chalk round 1 aside from Michael Penix going to 8.
I got to put you on the spot at IC_draft because you're the best in the business. Ian Cummings, Pro Football Network. Make sure you follow him. Everybody, we all love to talk about the first round. You got to hit with your first round picks, but the good teams generally win on day 2 and day 3. Your favorite pick on day 2, your favorite pick on day 3.
That's a good question. My favorite pick on day 3 would probably be Jared Wiley to Kansas City. He was my tight end 3. He was the top 100 player for me. I think the value there could be phenomenal. I think you're looking at a guy who could be the successor truly in that offense. I think the size adjusted fluidity at 6'6", 250, the smooth athleticism up the seam, but the route running ability as well. And then the hands of the catch point. I think he really proved himself to be an asset in the red zone in 2023, but he's got some rack to him as well. I thought Jared Wiley was criminally underrated in this class, and the Chiefs just lucked into him. So to get him, and I think the talent of round 4 is where they got him. That was a phenomenal pick for me. And then round 2, my favorite pick there, I could go, my cliche pick is Johnny Newton to the Washington Commanders because he was a top 15 guy for me. I know he fell because of the medical concerns, but in Dan Quinn's scheme, his ability to rush from 5 tech and 3 tech and even sometimes 7 tech with that flexibility that he has at 6'2", 300 pounds, absolutely absurd. I thought the Commanders had a phenomenal day 2 in general. Picking Johnny Newton, Mike Sainristil was one of my guys from Michigan. That dude is one of the most intelligent physical defensive backs out there. He can play the nickel. He can make plays at the catch point, former wide receiver. And then he's got really good communication on the back end as well. And then getting Ben Sinnott, tight end from Kansas State, versatile, very good route runner, very fluid, very explosive, good rack as well. So I think those were a few of my favorite ones. I could keep going down the list, but I think Washington, some of their picks stood out.
I like Washington's draft. No more Daniel Snyder. That's not good news for the Eagles and the other teams in the NFC.
It could be a third contender in the NFC East coming soon with them if Daniels pans out.
Yeah, Daniels, Newton. You mentioned a cornerback from Michigan, Sanat, Brandon Coleman, Luke McCaffrey in the 3rd round. That's a good draft. That's a good draft on paper.
Yeah.
All right, Ian, thanks for joining the show, man. As you can probably tell in the chat box, this is why we love getting Ian on. He knows his stuff about these prospects. He breaks them down better than anybody in the business, as Johnny Mac said. Ian Cummings from Pro Football Network. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at IC_draft. Ian, thanks for joining the show, man. It was awesome.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ian.
There's Ian Cummings from Pro Football Network. Johnny Mac, I love listening to Ian Cummings. We talked about it a little bit before he came on, but man, that guy can break down a prospect, can he?
Yeah, he's the best in the business, and part of it is you got to get it across when you're in the media, and he just has that ability to immediately make people understand what a player can do well, what maybe he needs to work on. And he knows everybody. You know, I almost took a hiccup when he said he hasn't watched much Trevor Keegan.
Yeah, right.
It's like, you know, probably because Michigan's so good, you just see him in general. But yeah, he knows everybody, and it's pretty impressive.
All right, we're going to come back and wrap up this Tuesday edition of Birds 365. The draft is fully settling in now, and fans are starting to, you know, analyze. We're starting to analyze more of the picks and how this is going to shake up each roster. John, before we get out of here, I want to ask you about, we just hit on it a little bit with Ian, the NFC East. Commanders have a good draft. The Cowboys are still out there. The Eagles are there.
Cowboys always draft well. I hate, you know,
yeah,
they're
Eagles
not good in free agency, but I
true.
talk about Will McClay all the time. He's Baltimore, Dallas drafting. Look to those two teams. Pretty consistent.
So we'll come back and we'll wrap up this Tuesday edition of Birds 365, and we'll touch on the potential power rankings of the NFC East. Stay tuned on Birds 365. We'll close it out next.